We begin with a report from James O'Keefe, who's on his own now, but still covering extremely important stories like this. The Daily Wire reports, quote, James O'Keefe released a video Thursday evening in which two female inmates at the Washington State Correctional Center for Women discuss male inmates allegedly abusing the system by claiming to be transgender. O'Keefe said that the WCCW has been the tip of the spear with inclusivity in the prison system, as he went on to explain that OMG News, which is his new outfit, went to great lengths to protect the identities of the two women by significantly altering their voices and blurring out their faces. The video identified the inmates as inmate number 1 and inmate number 2. It was not clear how or when the interview was conducted. Quote, so we have men rapists, men murderers, child rapists, men who have killed women and are in prison for raping and killing women who get put in our rooms, inmate number 1 claimed. Imagine coming into your room one day and you're in closed custody and you turn around and there's a man standing there peeing in the toilet because you have the bathroom in your room in CCU. There's nothing you can do. I know there's some having sex with women. There was some like assaulting, but no one reported it, inmate number 1 said. Actually, we have the video, which is a little hard to understand because of all the voice alteration they had to do to protect the anonymity of these women. But we'll watch a little bit of this.
So we have men rapists, men murderers, child rapists, men who have killed women and are in prison for raping and killing women who get put in our rooms.
James O'Keefe, OMG News here. Have you heard of the Washington State Correctional Center for Women, which has been in the news for its policy to place men who identify as women in the same prison, sometimes even the same cell as biological women?
Imagine coming to your room one day and you're in close custody and you turn around and there's a man standing up peeing in the toilet because you have the bathroom in your room in CCU. What? There's nothing you can do.
What you just heard and what you're about to hear are multiple inmates describing their experiences with transgendered women, formerly known as men, within the women's prison. WCCW has been the tip of the spear with inclusivity in the prison system. To protect the at-risk individuals involved, we've taken steps to conceal the identities of the sources and the inmates.
I know there's some having sex with women. There was some, assaulting, but no one reported it. It's normally in institutions you have segregations are always going to apply, no matter what institution that you're at, all across America. But somehow in this institution, they are adapting ways to apply these so-called mandated laws that came out of nowhere to prohibit segregation for certain individuals.
So we can pause there. So they're prohibiting segregation based on sex in these prisons, is what she's saying. Like I said, a little hard to understand there because of how they, the great lengths here to protect the identities of these women for obvious reasons. More from the Daily Wire, quoting the inmates. Inmate number 1 said that some of the men who were getting put in the prison by claiming that they were transgender were doing so just so they could have sex with female inmates. Quote, there's nothing you can do but say you're going to kill yourself and then go down to the crazy unit to get out of that room, inmate number 1 said. And if you refuse to go back in there, you get in major trouble. I told all this to the assistant secretary. Inmate number 2 said that normally in correctional institutions, people are segregated like sex offenders. Usually sex offenders are not in general population. They're always in the population of their own. My safety is now in jeopardy, she says, because I cannot voice my freedom of speech, but that doesn't apply anymore because now they're implementing this new gender equality role that forces us to conform to what they want us to believe in about the transgenders, inmate number 2 said. I've heard some of these men talk about how they would want to get a girl pregnant so the girl could form a lawsuit against WCCW and say that he raped her and he's willing to go along with it. He's pretty much the mastermind behind his own scandal. It's hard to put into words just how evil this is. It is a direct violation of, common sense and basic human decency, but also the 8th Amendment, which is a guarantee against cruel and unusual punishment. It's definitely cruel and also certainly extremely unusual to lock women in prison cells with violent, dangerous men. And these women are totally vulnerable. They are defenseless, voiceless. They can't do anything about it. They can't say anything. They can't do anything. Even by these two women, by speaking out behind the blur, behind the voice alteration, still there's a chance that prison officials could find out who said all of this. They could find out where this came from, maybe, and they can, they could either enact reprisals themselves. They could feed the information to the other inmates, to the male inmates that these women are complaining about, putting their lives, in jeopardy. And so they put their lives on the line in a certain way, and are aware of that by speaking out, which is quite heroic. I mean, we know how difficult it is for women and for girls who are on sports teams and locker rooms to speak up against it, because we know what they can face. Just look at what Riley Gaines faced. Well, now take that exact situation, except the women are in prison and have no rights at all. This also really reveals the leftist victimhood hierarchy in all of its hideous, confused glory, right? Because here you've got female prison inmates. Many of them are women of color, as the left would say. Many of them coming from poverty. Statistically speaking, a lot of these come from poverty. And though the non-violent offender in prison thing, that's kind of certainly exaggerated. We got all these non-violent offenders. Well, it's exaggerated when it comes to men in prison. A great proportion of the men in prison are violent. But in women's prisons, it's actually true that many of them are non-violent offenders, because men and women are different and they commit different kinds of crimes. Not to say that women can't be violent, but the majority of women in prison are there for drugs, they're there for property crimes, they're there for public order offenses, as they're called. So you could not ask for a group that seems to tick off more victim categories, right? It checks off more. You couldn't ask for a group that would seem to check off more of the victim categories. You have nonviolent, poor, black, female prison inmates. So you would think that would be as victim-y as you can get as far as the left's concerned, and yet they are superseded entirely by trans. Just think about this. A white male convicted rapist takes priority over a nonviolent, poor black female by this equation, if the white male says that he's trans. If he remains a male and admits that he's male, and he has no choice but to remain male, but if he says that he's male, then he'll remain all the way at the bottom. But all he has to do is say, "Oh, I'm a woman," and that's do not pass go, do not collect. That's you're going right to the top. Actually, I just confused that Monopoly analogy, but never mind. He takes such a priority that, in fact, the very life of the woman doesn't matter to the left. Her life, her safety, all of that is sacrificed. What the left is saying is that it is worth it to them. It is worth it to them for a woman to get raped repeatedly in a prison cell for the sake of affirming the trans dude. That is directly and explicitly what the left is saying. Because we have, male sex offenders, male rapists. You put them in a jail cell with women. It's not hard to predict how that's going to go. And people on the left, they know that. And what they're saying is, well, hey, it's a risk worth taking for the sake of affirming this trans person. It's just, it's as I said, it's really impossible to fully capture just how wicked this is.